So what should the international community do to calm the crisis? Can diplomatic talks resolve the conflict, or is military intervention the answer? Joining me now from Winnipeg, James Bezan, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence in St. John's. Jack Harris, he's the NDP defence critic. And in Toronto, John McKay, the Liberal environment critic. Thanks for being here, gentlemen. Thanks particularly for standing by when we went to that developing story out of Calgary. It was an important one, so I appreciate you staying there and waiting for us to get to you. Now let's get to this story. James Bezan, the Prime Minister announcing 6 fighter jets, 20 military personnel to help support NATO. Can you give us a sense of the role that Canada is going to play there? Are we going to go into Ukraine, stay on the border? Do we have a sense of where we'll be positioned?
Well, as the Prime Minister said earlier today, what we are really concerned about is the continued aggressive actions of Russia on the eastern border of Ukraine and as well as within eastern Ukraine. So we do have to be more involved. As NATO members decided yesterday, we have to bolster military presence in Central and Eastern Europe, and so that's why we've committed the assets that we have alongside all 28 member states of NATO. And as they gather and further discuss where those assets are actually deployed, and collaboration is to figure it out as we move forward. I think that is going to be very important. But
is it fair to say, though, James Bezan, we don't really know what we're going to be doing at this stage, or where we will be based?
Well, definitely this is about taking care of NATO territory first and foremost, as well as making sure that we continue to do everything that we can possible and standing steadfast with the people of Ukraine. Right. That we want to make sure that we're sending the right signals to Russia, that NATO nations will not just sit idly by and allow them to continue to be so provocative within the Ukrainian context.
But is there a sense, though, because we are, yes, filling in for part of our NATO mandate, sending some military goods over there, is there a sense that we will get militarily involved in the crisis in Ukraine, or no, we are going to keep on the outside?
Well, we are still very hopeful that we'll find a way to de-escalate the situation, and the talks today in Geneva were promising. But at the same time, we've heard similar words coming out of the Kremlin before from Foreign Minister Lavrov as well as President Putin, and of course then they went ahead and annexed Crimea. So we don't want to be going down that path again. So we have to be taking the necessary steps here to be prepared in the event that Russia does not want to respect Ukrainian sovereignty, and nor that of other former Soviet states such as Estonia and Latvia that have minority Russian populations, and those are member states of NATO, and Article 5 is at play.
Okay, and we'll get into what happened in Geneva a little bit and your take on that, but let me bring in your colleagues. Jack Harris, do you think that we are putting ourselves at risk of being involved in some sort of military action just by sending planes over there? Is this the right thing to do? What's your response?
No, I think, first of all, let's not conflate the two here. The military support for NATO is actually supporting our allies in Eastern Europe, particularly those who are close to the Ukraine, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania. They're quite, they're close to the action, and they have a history, of course, in the past. They're members of NATO. I was in Latvia 10 days ago with the NATO Parliamentary Association, the delegation from Eastern Europe, very concerned about this. So this is a NATO action to ensure and provide some confidence to our Eastern European allies that the NATO is concerned about their stability, their sovereignty, and their security. So that's what that's about. It's not about overflying the Ukraine or beefing up military presence, yes, but for NATO purposes, not for the Ukraine. Canada was very late to the game here. 8 other nations had already committed this, so this is not really big news today. The big news today, of course, is what happened in Geneva, and the fact that the Ukraine and Russia and Americans and the EU sat down and came up with some concrete proposals.
And I'll get to them, but I want to let John McKay weigh in on the move by Canada today.
Well, we support the move that Canada made. We are long-standing partners in the NATO alliance, and this does seem to be an appropriate Article 5 response. We are a little concerned about, you don't move airplanes into strategic locations because they're there for decoration. Where it goes from here, I don't know. We sincerely hope that the Geneva conference actually produces concrete results. That would be preferable. We do have a concern with the the issue of the capability of the military. It's been, defunded a lot over the last few years, and of course the story around our air abilities these days is not a happy story. But nevertheless, we do, as a general proposition, support the
let me break down a little bit for our viewers what did happen in Geneva when Russia sat down to some negotiations with the Ukraine, U.S., and the EU, and they agreed to a series of different things, which I'll show you now, that is an attempt to de-escalate tensions, to refrain from violence and intimidation, for illegal armed groups, to disarm and leave all illegally seized buildings, which we know is happening along the eastern side of Ukraine, amnesty granted to protesters except those who have committed capital crimes, the Ukrainian constitution revised, a national dialogue to be held, I guess, to determine what the future of Ukraine might be, and finally for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe to immediately start to implement these de-escalation measures. James Bezan, are these things that are going to make a difference concretely on the ground? Do you believe, given the behavior we've seen from Russia in recent weeks, that Russia will actually follow through?
Well, I guess we all can be hopeful that this is the right path forward that Ukraine and Russia and the rest of the world can agree to. Unfortunately, what we've experienced with Russia in the past, when it comes to Crimea, when it comes to Donetsk, when it comes to what we're seeing happening in Luhansk and Kharkiv and Odessa and other regions of Ukraine, they still have special operatives and provocateurs who are on the ground. They are hiring thugs to overtake buildings. They are hiring or rent-a-crowds to have their protests on the street, and this has become very unsettling. The clashes that we saw earlier today in Donetsk Oblast, again, pro-Russian militia or actually black ops from Russia trying to overtake another airfield that were successfully turned back by Ukrainian forces. That just isn't the right path forward. No. So we have to continue to engage diplomatically. We have to continue to expand sanctions until President Putin and the kleptocrats that surround him within the Kremlin finally take heed and back down from this very aggressive stance that they have in Ukraine. Just
to let people know, John Baird, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, just tweeting a few moments ago that he believes the talks in Geneva are a step in the right direction, but more needs to be done. Of course, he's traveling to some of the Baltic states, Poland and others next Tuesday. Jack Harris, your thoughts on where we're at now and whether we should buy that Russia is ready to de-escalate?
Well, I think more needs to be done is right. It's not good enough for Canada just to posture and take pot shots. I think we do actually have to step up our own diplomatic engagement. We've heard some from encouraging statements today in your news report you just showed about people in the eastern Ukraine saying, well, we don't want to leave Russia, but we do want to have more autonomy. And I think the Ukraine has agreed to that in these talks today. So there is a path forward. As John Kerry said, as Mr. Obama said as well, these are words at this point. So we do have to depend on concrete results, but concrete steps have been proposed. We want to see what happens over the coming days and a little while. But there's more that Canada can do in terms of perhaps assisting in some of these discussions and talks, helping to monitor elections, stepping up our contribution in a constructive way.
Don't you think we're a little bit far from that, though? I mean, I don't think we're anywhere near it.
We're not really, because we just heard people talk about wanting to talk about making perhaps some revisions to constitutional arrangements, greater autonomy for some of these areas. We talked about there's elections obviously coming up. So yes, we want to assure our allies and neighbors, and we're doing that through NATO and through the statements that are being made. But I think Canada can play a more constructive role on a diplomatic level by engaging more inside of the Ukraine with perhaps assistance in election monitoring, in discussions and negotiations.
I guess I'm wondering if there's enough stability to even engage in that sort of thing. But John McKay, let's get your take on where we're at now that these talks have concluded.
Well, it may well be a critical point. You don't really know until a few days and weeks pass. I'm hopeful. You have to be hopeful in this sort of business. James is right. There is a discrepancy between Mr. Putin's rhetoric and Mr. Putin's actual actions on the ground. And until those two things are united, it's going to be very difficult to trust what the Russians might want to do in the area. I do think that John Bair's statement is helpful. I would, however, encourage him to be more on the helpful statement side rather than the bombastic side. I don't think that much has been said by the minister in the past that's been particularly useful. It obviously has no impact on Mr. Putin, and I don't know what impact, therefore, it actually has. So, you know, in summary, let's hope that we can move forward. Let's hope that we can de-escalate this, because the implications are probably really quite unknowable. Russia is a formidable power and has formidable influence around the world, and this is not an isolated little country like Libya where people kind of generally agreed that this was a good thing to remove a dictator.
I want to put one question to James Bezan. I don't have time to put it to everybody, but just one question for government perspective in relation to this news today that John Kerry talked about, that there were Jews in eastern Ukraine who were told to register with authorities or face consequences. Here's what John Kerry had to say about that.
Notices were sent to Jews in one city indicating that they had to identify themselves. This is not just intolerable, it's grotesque. It is beyond unacceptable.
What do you make of that news, James Bezan?
Well, it was actually broke by USA Today earlier today, and I think it really speaks to the cynicism and hypocrisy that we've been hearing out of Russia. So they've always been calling the government in Kiev as being anti-Semites, but yet here they are being very xenophobic in their own way and making all Jews, as they were leaving their synagogues from Passover services, to giving them handouts from the pro-Russian temporary Donetsk regional authority. This is their self-proclaimed government, and they're saying now you have to not just register, but register your property.
It is appalling, and it does speak to the ancient grievances that still exist and can be stirred up in a heartbeat, and that is actually a big fear.
You all seem to agree on that point, and it's certainly something.
It's very disturbing.
We'll keep an eye on closely. Everyone, thank you for your smart thoughts this evening. I appreciate it. Thanks very much. James Bezan, Jack Harris, John McKay. Always good to have a good debate and intelligent discussion as well. Thanks.